Hello, welcome back to Following the Chosen with me, Ben McEachran from Hope Mornings, and you, Laura Bennett from Hope Afternoons. Laura,
Indeed.
what did you think of episode 1, season 5?
I think there's high expectations set for this purely because we are so on board with what the Chosen train are doing, with what this show is doing. So when they come back into cinemas, when they have as big a marketing campaign as they did for this as they have, I mean, Times Square, New York City, like I feel like that is kind of the pinnacle of the way to advertise something, and they did that.
Who thought Jesus was going to be in Times Square, Laura?
Right, exactly. And like the photos, I think we've spoken about this previously in other contexts. Annie Leibovitz, who is like a massive famous celebrity photographer and does really iconic portraits, she was behind a lot of the imagery that they did for the promotion for this season. So I feel like they set this up to be extremely brilliant, and I love what they do with this, but I think it's starting to get to the point where we're 5 seasons in. There's still so much of the story to tell, although we know where this show is going to go narratively, largely speaking, if you're familiar with the Bible. So I'm starting to wonder if some of the wow factor and the real wonder of what The Chosen does is maybe not as strong as it used to be. Not because they're doing it any less brilliantly, but because we're becoming a little bit familiar with it.
That's how I'm feeling about it, Laura, and going to the cinema to see episode 1 of season 5, like The Chosen's been doing now last couple of seasons, releasing episodes, and you're right about marketing campaign, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and to some degree that feels like it sets up more expectation for us, but I'm not sure that's fair to put that on the Chosen team. Like, you are now making me feel like I should expect more out of your episodes because you're in Times Square, you've got Annie Leibovitz, you're going to cinemas all around the world. And so therefore, episode 1's definitely going to blow my socks off. It's going to have the wow factor. It's going to be everything. I think I've got to check myself on that now because we're still talking about an ongoing TV show. As you mentioned, we know where it's going, we know where it's up to, and we know what The Chosen does and how it does it. So maybe I should just be thinking, I'm going to go to the cinema to watch Jesus enter Jerusalem, see him at the Last Supper and see the final week of his life. Not, this is going to be the most amazing cinematic experience I've ever had, which I think is what I was sort of expecting when I went in.
Yeah, and I think this is where maybe the attitude of the viewer comes into our awareness a little bit more, because you don't want to forget the fact that as modern consumers of entertainment, we are so critical and we're so wanting the latest thing, the next thing, give us the big thing, give us the entertaining thing. The Chosen, yes, it has those elements, but this is the story of Jesus Christ. This is the story of his disciples, God's plan for salvation for humanity. Let's not forget the subject matter that's being dealt with in this. And you want to be artistically critical of how it's delivered, sure. But I think you don't want that nature of how we view things to come into play too much, when I think the strength of the show, of us being introduced into Jesus and aspects of his character in ways that we haven't been, that's still there. The heart of what they're doing with The Chosen is still really well done in episode 1 of season 5, because we are seeing some of the things I thought we saw more of was the way Jesus is increasingly coupling these experiences of lament, that spiritual practice of feeling sorrow, of feeling some kind of disappointment and heaviness, with also a really great joy. And I just don't want the sort of spiritual significance, I suppose, of what's happening in these episodes to get lost in our desire to want things to be artistically extravagant and wow me, as you've said.
I think it's already evident, Laura, that as we're talking about episode 1 of season 5, that clearly we are wrestling with our own expectations. And I think we're heading towards saying, well, at least I am, that the first episode for me, initially I think I was a bit underwhelmed, but the more I've thought about it, the more I think, now hang on a minute, it was good, it was fine. It's starting to get us towards into the final week of Jesus' life. And yet, here's me struggling with some of what I built up around The Chosen. But as you are rightly pointing out, let us not forget what the show is about and who it's representing and what we're heading into. As we head into the actual episode, Laura, I really, really, really liked the mechanic of what seems like they're going to be doing throughout the whole season, which is starting off with a glimpse, a couple of minutes of the Last Supper itself. So breaking up the Last Supper across the whole season, rather than we might have expected it to be the final episode, like they've often done in previous seasons, building to a massive moment. I'm sure they're doing that anyway, but I expected that to be the Last Supper. So there's my expectations actually overturned, Laura.
Yes, like in episode 2, which we'll get to in the next episode, the tables being overturned themselves.
Oh, nice trailer for episode 2. But episode 1, anything else stand out to you about episode 1?
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to mention, it's a little it's not a huge moment, but when Jesus stumbles across the wedding and ends up involved because
towards the end of the episode, you mean?
Yes, where like he's like, your joy kind of appealed to me, and he kind of just enters into the celebration of what's happening. And it's not like it's massively significant necessarily, but I feel like it kind of was in that moment, because it was like just a sweet little sense that Jesus loves joy, and that like where joy is, he's like up for the party, you know? And I just thought, isn't that a sweet kind of picture of how part of ourselves, the way we celebrate, the way we, you know, engage in those kind of things in life, Jesus was interested in it. And I don't know, like it just felt like a nice way to think of Jesus being intrigued by our behavior and wanting to be part of it.
And as you pointed out already, The Chosen is great at balancing so much of the complexity that's recorded in the Gospels, in the Bible, about Jesus, let alone so many other figures. And there's the joy, but also in an episode that starts off with talking about belief and following Jesus and being committed to him, irrespective of where he goes and what happens to him. And you're right, there is an undercurrent, especially if you know anything about Jesus' life and where this is headed. There is this very strong undercurrent that keeps bubbling up about the sorrow in Jesus and about the awful events that he is headed squarely into. And the entrance into Jerusalem, I thought was really well handled. The Palm Sunday and the Hosanna, and yet Jesus, you see him, Jonathan Roumie does a great job of, you see him wrestling internally, externally with what is headed his way when he heads towards the cross. So this episode does do another nice job of subtly bringing in, you mentioned it before, the joy and the lament that is so inherent to these final moments of Jesus' life. What did you think also of the addition of, there's a character that is being focused on who is anonymous at the moment, but seems to be surveying what Jesus is doing, writing down in a notebook, but we haven't been officially introduced. That's Luke, right? The writer of of Matthew, Mark, Luke, the third gospel. That's Luke, isn't it?
What a prediction. I'll go with you on that. I think
Don't you think so? Who else could it be?
Yeah, well, I think that's fair. I think you're right. I think they're probably trying to, in the way The Chosen do, weave in these things that give context and a broader picture to these episodes, to the stories. And also too, as we've said, if they're trying to find ways to bring something fresh to each season, there's something, you know, kind of put that in there.
Speaking of freshness though, on the not so fresh side, is that that's not even an expression, Laura, but I wasn't totally gripped by some of the other incidental interactions, like Pilate and Caiaphas and some of the disciples' conversations throughout the episode. To me, they didn't kind of touch the sides as much as we've seen in previous seasons, previous episodes, different interactions. But I'm glad you pointed out Jesus in that wedding celebration and the dance, and just being involved in a joyful moment in what's heading towards increasingly a not so joyful moments for Jesus. And again, reminding us that The Chosen strives to do so much, and often in such a limited period of time, where they're bringing in stuff that's outside scripture that they've totally invented to try to help share this story of Jesus and his followers. And here's me as this viewer in the cinema again, thinking Chosen keeps doing a great job of spending its money well. You can see it up on screen, everything from the size of the crowds to the sets. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. As they weave all their elements together, I sit back thinking, oh yeah, I'm not as into this as I was previously. At the same time, hats off to, I'm still watching this great television show, long format, long storytelling. As you try to bring everything together, I'm here in an episode that to me isn't going to go down in the history of great Chosen episodes, but you're still doing a really good job of bringing together all of these elements as you work towards a climax. As you already pointed out, we all know.
It does make me think that, like, since season 1 up until right now, what's the whole point of this thing? Yes, they want to make a great TV show, but it's about the discussions that we have after them. It's about how this prompts us, if you're somebody who is a follower of Jesus, to consider these elements of your faith, to think about them through a different lens, to imagine the full context of Jesus' life and those around him. And then also, if you're somebody who isn't a Christian and isn't as familiar with the Christian story, to ask questions and to discuss, the ideas that we're seeing and go, is that really what Jesus thought? How come Jesus did or didn't heal people in these ways? And the series deals with all of these sorts of things and so much more. And I feel like increasingly that's where the value in this is. Like, we understand what they're doing as a show. Now it's like, let's have more conversations about it. Let's think about how this feeds our faith or challenges our faith or invites us into faith, less so than the actual machine of this whole chosen ecosystem.
So true. And I just feel rebuked to my face, Laura, as we're talking about in a
that
really
wasn't
polite,
my intention.
in a really polite way, because I've spent plenty of this conversation trying to think about my own expectations and sort of pulling apart or delving into the mechanics, as you said, of episode 1. But go back to what The Chosen is about, as you just pointed out. And unlike pretty much every other TV show ever, how can you have conversations about those that go into the eternal significance of what The Chosen is representing? And the start of this episode with Jesus and his disciples speaking about true belief and sincere devotion and following your selfless sacrificial leader wherever he goes is key to understanding not just who Jesus is, but who any of us is as a follower of him. And that's a television show we're talking about, presenting this to us.
Yeah, it's big ideas, and shows can have big ideas, but I don't know that they have the same ramifications as maybe what The Chosen are doing. And you think of even Peter, who is ultimately devoted to Christ, or sort of, as the story goes, so he says, right? And then to know that he's going to betray Jesus down the line, or at least deny Jesus, I think it makes it cut even more deeply when you see how sincere the desire to follow. And maybe this is true for some of us on occasion, where our desire to follow Jesus is so sincere. We believe exactly what we're saying in the moment when we say, what we believe and otherwise. But then, you have to admit that there are times where that falls short, right? Where even our highest desire to want to follow Christ and be obedient wherever he leads, sometimes we just don't. And I think the interaction that Jesus has with Peter points to just how deeply that would be felt when we don't necessarily get it right, but there's not a judgment in that. I think they deal with that quite well also.
Laura, you've already done a terrific trailer for episode 2. Actually, pretty much a spoiler. You told everybody it's where Jesus turns over the tables. We're going to get into that on the next episode of Following The Chosen. Thanks for being with us. In the comments below, let us know what you thought of the first episode. How are your expectations going for The Chosen? Are they being met? Did you go and check out episode 1, episode 2 and more at the cinema? Or have you waited to watch it on the small screen? Where are you at with everything from belief in Jesus, believing Jesus up on screen, to all the other incidental interactions that happen in episode 1, including that joyful moment at the wedding? Let us know what you think about that. Would love to hear from you. If you're subscribing to the podcast, thank you very much. If you haven't, you should do it right now. Share, subscribe, star rate, all those things. Laura Bennett. Laura, thanks again for joining me on Following The Chosen.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time.